make an offer. That's our strategy. Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the Thursday, March 7th meeting of the City Council Business and Community Affairs Committee. Today, we have two items on the agenda, the first being a discussion regarding accessory commercial units. And I believe that Ms. Hudson has a presentation for us today, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
I do, thank you. Glasses on so I can see. So we had this before BACA back in December of 21, and as we discussed before, I think we just weren't really sure the direction we wanted to go. So I was just going to recap some of that before we moved on to more of the presentation. But from our previous discussion, I went back and I listened to the meeting and made notes of the comments that council had at that meeting. And one of the things that really kept coming back around was the idea of the neighborhood engagement. You know, we want to really get out there and ask. And really it was focused on core, you know, but do we want to expand out of the core area? But right now we're just still talking about the core. And so do we want to have the meetings, you know, have break it into, you know, sections or something, neighborhoods, old silk stockings or something like that, just to throw that one out there. And ask the neighbors, you know, what are you looking for? What works? What doesn't work? And really get the neighborhood engaged. One of the points from that last meeting was, you know, could we get Neighborhood Alliance to come in and start that organization with getting those meetings set up? And their contract actually will be renewed July 1, so that would be a good time if that's something that we wanted to expand into their contract. Talked to Lisa about that today. And then we kept circling back around on this standard of expectation, you know, utilizing existing structures, really holding the neighborhood together with what is there currently, you know, that baseline criteria of the neighborhood, because we talked about, in the PowerPoint you'll see, places like Midway, the library, just some of these other smaller existing businesses, and they were the old structures. They didn't really come in and change a lot, didn't change the footprint. You know, it's in here too, but the one over on Peters by the courthouse, they finally opened.
Levity.
Yeah, Levity, yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's another example that I had in here at that time. So we wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to kind of keep the neighborhood intact. Another thing that we talked about, we didn't want an applicant to have to come in and do a SPUD. So we're kind of tossing around the idea of having a neighborhood commercial district zone that we would adopt and put into the zoning ordinance. But we also thought it was still really important for the applicants to still come to council and also give the neighbors the ability to have the meetings with them, to have the pre-development meeting with them and express any concerns or anything like that, but not have to write an actual SPUD, but you know, have a checklist of the small amount of uses that they could do within that neighborhood commercial, and see, you know, have the opportunity for council to look at that.
So would that be treated like a special use permit, basically?
Right, but
Okay.
it would just be that straight zoning.
Right.
So we wouldn't have to have them write anything. And like I said, when we had talked about it before, we were really looking at just some specific, very applicable neighborhood uses. And then we also were talking about, you know, the change of ownership. And when they do sell the business, is somebody going to come in and really uphold what you guys already approved? We don't want a lot of changes. And so we could do that as we do with special use. We go out and we make sure that they're still doing what was approved by council. There is a fee for that, but we wouldn't have to charge the fee. I mean, we could at least just reissue maybe a certificate of compliance or a certificate of occupancy for them to make sure that we have visited the site and that they're going to move forward with what was adopted. And then the concern that we had at that meeting also was, you know, parking, on-street parking. You know, we talked about the earth. They actually have parking in back. Some places won't be able to do that, but, you know, where are we gonna put them without negatively impacting the existing neighborhood? So those were the bullet points that I got from that previous meeting. And then just to go over again, at that meeting, we had talked about, in the previous Plan Norman, Councilmember Hall at that time pointed out they had actually had a type in there for neighborhood commercial node. And I took this straight from that definition that they had in there. And I thought it was interesting in that one that they'd actually had an area requirement, you know, 1/2 acre. But again, it's still within a small node commercial idea.
Half an acre is still a pretty good sized lot.
It is. It really is, but that's just what they had. And so since we had talked about that at that meeting, I wanted to make sure we went over that here today. And then the neighborhood commercial, this is just a generalized definition of the neighborhood commercial that we'd gone over last time. And again, it's really focusing on small grocers, hardware stores, personal services, and stuff like that. Then our definition of the local commercial is, you can see that here, but I put in parentheses down there the uses that we have in C1. So we look at this as a local commercial district, but the uses that were included in the C1 really are outside of what we have been talking about as, you know, uses that we would want to see. So we'll, you know, obviously pull from some of that, but we need to really limit that. And then we don't have to spend a lot of time on these. I just wanted you to see them again. I mean, we had Edmond, San Marcos, and these are just the straight reuse of existing buildings for the neighborhood commercial. Fayetteville, Denton, and then I also had the presentation on the accessory commercial unit. And those are obviously the existing buildings, but they're also connected to the existing structures, the residential structures that are there on the lot. Again, these are, you know, pizza joints. There are, some of these are bars, and they've probably gotten special use for those, but.
Councilmember Holman.
So would you say like Buchanan's Bicycles which is attached to a house that was originally there? Is that like the main one I can think of?
Probably
right now
would
that's
fit
like
into
that.
what the accessory commercial unit would be, yeah.
Storefront on the bottom like that, but it's a house with apartments above. Okay.
Yep.
Just-
And again, I mean, you can see the residence on one side and the business there on the right side of the picture. Some of these are so cool. I'm sorry, I just think that they're so cool.
Yeah.
I love it.
Camps in Oklahoma City at 23rd and Class
Yeah, yeah.
is, I guess, La Brasa restaurant
Right.
now, but the building is called Camps, and it was a historic grocery store, but it's a house.
Yeah.
But the first level looks like a commercial storefront. But the rest of it looks like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing what you can do.
Yeah, when people hear the idea of, you know, scabbing on a commercial building on the front of your residence, your eyes light up. You're like, oh, no, we're not going to do that. But when you see the actual example, I mean,
How it
these
works.
beautiful little projects, they're quaint, they're small, they fit in the neighborhood. I don't think they stand out at all or are a negative to the neighborhood at all. I know you've, you know, we're talking about accessory commercial units, but I think you really hit the intent of what I wanted to have this discussion about, neighborhood commercial. I mean, the accessory ones are cool, but I think the broader discussion on just how do we get commercial services into neighborhoods, you know, without dropping a bunch of 7-Elevens in people's neighborhoods, essentially.
Yeah. One of the articles I was reading, you know, preparing for this was people are even bringing in the pods,
Yeah.
metal, I can't say the name now.
Shipping containers.
The shipping, thank you. You know, they're bringing those in and creating these little neighborhood commercial. I thought that was pretty ingenious. And then, of course, we've got ours, you know, like I said last time, we've got the Midway, the Earth I was talking about, you know. Oh, I think I'm sorry, I want to back up. So I did point out when I was doing this last time, you know, this is a corner lot. We've got mid-block, clearly it can be successful if it's something that is not deterring from the neighborhood. And they've not, I mean, they've been there a lot of years.
As long as I can remember. Councilmember Grant.
I would say location, because from the earth, you can walk down to Lions.
Lions Park. Mhm.
Yeah, and then you think of all the summer breezes and the things that help. There's a synergy there.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Holman.
Is there, how did that building end up there? Or do we have any record of it?
You know, I mean, listening to the discussion that we had, this was with the 884, got the zoning up there. So, I mean, something was there in 54 when the zoning ordinance was done, because this one was done with 884. So I don't know if it was a neighborhood grocery or if it was a hardware store. I just don't have the history of it, but I
I
mean,
think
it's.
that commercial building was there the whole time, probably.
Well, I don't know if that building, but when this was established, this C1 local commercial zoning was on this site, and it was done with 884. So,
I think you just highlighted really the foundation of this is how cities used to build themselves. Like, this is not a new concept or new idea. We're trying to, what's old is new again, and we're just trying to revive an old concept here.
We know how hard it would be to propose that now.
Oh, absolutely.
To
You have
say
to-
I'm going to build a box commercial building in the middle of a block, a residential block with houses on both sides,
Yeah, you'd have people losing their minds.
But everybody loves this because it was already there. But I've always wondered how it ended up there. Like, even the Midway makes some more sense because it's on like the corner and the end of the block. And this one, though, being in the middle of a block, and there's no commercial really until you get to the end of to Main
That's a
Street.
good point.
yeah.
So I've always thought it was interesting.
Like I said, it's with the 884 that was done, but also, and I don't have it in here as one of the examples, but over to the west here, and I'm not going to be able to tell you the street, but there's a commercial zoning, and it was the same thing. It's mid-block, but they turned it into a daycare. Do you know which one I'm talking
yeah.
about?
Right,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. But prior to it becoming a daycare, it was a retail use. And I don't know what it was, but I just know in doing the research, when people have asked about doing some development around it and expanding it and stuff like that. Same thing. I mean,
On
it's
Iowa Street.
Iowa.
Yeah.
Mhm. It's mid-block.
But now I'm thinking of, the old Walden's Cleaners that was right there on Gray and Flood. That was a little house as well that was,
They
at some
expanded.
point, a house.
They expanded on it slowly.
And so I think, we've got more examples than we give ourselves credit for on this.
Without a doubt. And then this one was a rezoning that we did, with the Yellow Dog and Equity Brewing. And this is a law office. They did this back in 16, 17. But again, you wouldn't know. I think she's just got a little sign up there. You just wouldn't know that this is not a single-family home. And then again, there's the 309 Peters that they went through and rezoned to have that business come in there. And again, a perfect location. It's across from the courthouse, 2 blocks south of Main, north of the historic district. I mean, it's a great location. Of course, the Rock Bar, things are continuing to develop around that, but thankfully they're keeping that in place and everything.
It's popular too.
Yeah. And then this is Virgin Law Office, and again, same thing. You wouldn't realize that it's a law office. And if I remember correctly, behind them, they have like a garage apartment that they actually rent out. So I think they've got something behind there as well. So I just wanted to go over what we had talked about last time so we could review that.
Councilmember Schuler.
What do we consider like Mary Abbott House? It's a nonprofit, but it's a business. It's
Yeah.
isn't an old house too?
It is
but
an
it's
old-
like adjacent. I know they have like adjacent space and some other stuff, but like
That's
that's kind of in the middle of the neighborhood too.
That's actually in a historic district. I know Anna East has worked with them a couple times, but they're, I did not look at the zoning, but I suspect that they're probably like office or maybe they're R3 and they've got a special use on. I haven't looked at that one. But, that's what I wanted to find out is on my notes from, can I just go back to that? So let me just go back to that one so we'll have it up there and we can talk about it. So that's what I want to find out from you. Do you want us to go ahead and approach Neighborhood Alliance and see if that's something that they would be willing to start the discussion, possibly, you know, look at it, adding it to the contract, start the neighborhood meetings?
Councilmember Grant, I'll come back to you because yours was on that.
I'm a yes. I think having worked with Old Silk Stockings on something that's coming potentially to the corner-ish of Porter and Robinson, that, yeah, you should definitely engage the neighborhoods. They like it when you do. In fact, they have valuable input for the developer about what their neighborhood might support. And honestly, maybe we'll hear some ideas from people who are excited about it. I'm sure there'll be like naysayers, but it's in full transparency what we're talking about, so.
Yeah, I think if they could help us flush out that list of uses, and you take that list of C1 uses and say, no, that doesn't belong in a neighborhood, that doesn't belong in a neighborhood, and kind of left with a boiled down list to start with that's got neighborhood feedback. I mean, I see some value in that. Councilmember Holman, you had a comment previously.
I do support definitely moving forward with it and asking them to get involved. But I was going to ask about, I think 916 Classen. It was the cultural Classen connection or whatever. We approved it a few years ago for Gail Hobson.
Oh,
And it's back to being a residence, but I was wondering, since we approved it to be used as a commercial space, and it's now reverted back to residence, how might that work?
think-
Or was that maybe just a special use?
I have to look at it. I think it was a special use, and so obviously the use.
So
the
that one
resi-
would have been different than probably these other ones, maybe. It's like we changed the zoning for Levity House. Or I think
Oh,
we did.
okay.
I think
Yes.
we did. Or they did a PUD. I think it was already commercial, but
I think it was an office use, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly, and they needed to rezone. But with Gail's Place, I think that they did do special use. That's also, I believe it's in a historic district as well, and so they had to go there first, and then they came to council for approval. But, you know, the underlying residential use could still go back if she left, so that's obviously what they did.
okay. Well, yeah, I'm definitely want to see more of these for sure.
Awesome. I mean, I love the presentation. I think the only rub I have is that I want to see two paths, because we talk about accessory units and we talk about neighborhood commercial. I think, you know, Midway Deli, the Earth, all that stuff, that's neighborhood commercial. Those aren't really accessory. But if you've got a principal dwelling, but, you know, just like you could build an ADU off the alley, being able to build an ACU off the alley, I just think it's two different buckets. So I don't want to try to marry them too much.
Okay?
Obviously, the goal is to get neighborhood commercial, and so if that is the straight path forward, that's the one we should focus on. But I also think there's an angle for accessory units as well.
So I will say this, I guess, from my side, when people come in and they want to do something, so let's say somebody wanted to do an accessory commercial unit right now, I mean, they could easily do that under a SPUD.
Okay.
I mean, that they could request that today. But maybe they don't really realize that,
Okay.
you know?
Yeah.
And so maybe we need to get this public discussion going, and that we can include that part of the discussion as well.
Yeah.
You know, when we get Neighborhood Alliance, you know, on board, you know, maybe it's just the neighborhood meetings of, this is what we would like to, you know, talk to you about, and, you know, ACUs are possible. You could do them right now.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't realize that, but,
No, I think that's a solid approach. I like that. And I think really where I'm coming from on the neighborhood commercial thing is I'd love to see this in the suburbs as well. You know, I know we're talking about the core strictly, but, you know, who's to say out in Castle Rock, I'm just picking a neighborhood, they wanted, you know, in place of a single-family home, they wanted to build a single-family home that was a coffee shop. It's just an amenity for that neighborhood. Obviously, the finances have to work for that person. So, I mean, I think that there'd be a lot of safeguards in place to where you wouldn't just get rampant commercial, but I see the value across the board, not just in the core.
So one of the things that I think we need to talk about as we move forward with this, and again, I think it starts with the neighborhood meetings, but, you know, right now in the zoning code, it specifically says that beauty shops are not considered I mean, they're not an allowed home occupation.
Yeah, right.
So I think that that's probably, we just need to wrap all of it into an overall
Absolutely.
discussion, because if we're wanting the neighborhood commercial or the accessory commercial units, I think that that would be one of the things that people would really jump on.
Sure.
Is, you know, because it's so expensive, not to shut down anybody's,
No,
you know,
but that's-
salon business or anything, but
That's exactly right. This is a pro-business, pro-development, and pro-small business initiative, because you think about, you know, what's cheaper in overhead, a Main Street storefront or your garage? I mean, you're lowering the bar to entry for a lot of people and giving a lot of people the opportunity to start businesses. And so I think Councilmember Grant.
On that, I was gonna say, because this came up in another discussion for me, that I guess in 2021, the state said that hair folks can work from home. So I was wondering how that, I talked to Brenda about it earlier, about a conflict of, okay, it's allowed at the state level, what does that mean for the city? And I think, and us looking it up, it was like one stylist can work from home and not have employees. It's like not a full shop, as it were.
and that might be for the state, but, I mean, the zoning ordinance specifically says, you know, due to the traffic, which, I mean, if you're one person and it's a home-based business.
Yeah.
And you don't have employees, I mean, realistically, you're gonna have one person there and they might overlap by 5 minutes, but not much.
Well, and that's where I'm like, you know, you use the existing driveway as the parking solution. And if that person wants to be able to park 2 cars, maybe they don't own a car themselves, because that means they are now able to park 2 cars in their business. Again, there's a lot of tertiary benefits to this. Councilmember Graham.
I was gonna say also, the core is weird and doesn't always have the driveways that you think
Fair.
they should have. I would say too, speaking of the core and its quirks, we have in some of these neighborhoods, like the bar ditch style dishes, we don't have curb and gutter, so I'm cool with street parking as long as people aren't actually in the grass destroying our infrastructure. So that is just like one thing I would think about in the older neighborhoods. Because as I understand it, cars parking on this compacts the dirt, and then the stormwater issue
Yep.
is magnified. So
Okay. You have direction?
Yes, I do.
Okay, excellent. Appreciate you very much.
Oh, absolutely, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have a reason? Glasses.
Okay, next item up on our agenda is a discussion regarding a request from the Weather Museum to hold a general obligation election bond for the construction of a new weather museum. And I believe Ms. Catherine Walker will be presenting.
Yes,
Okay.
we talked about this, I believe, in the first meeting in February.
think so.
Does that sound right?
Yes.
And so we're coming back to you because we have a specific request from Mr. Ross Forsyth at the Weather Museum to place a ballot proposition on the ballot for June for a general obligation limited tax bond. That would require it to be on your agenda Tuesday, and we felt like maybe we shouldn't just put it on the agenda, maybe we need to talk to you guys first. And this meeting was available, so thank you for entertaining it.
Absolutely.
What he's requesting is $15 million. First reading would be March 12th, second reading March 26th, if the June election date were to go forward. And he's really asking for this $15 million as seed money for the purpose of purchasing land, construction, equipping, planning, branding, and development, and other activities to aid in the obtaining of gifts or grants to create the Museum and Science Center weather experience. He's anticipating the cost of the facility would exceed $100 million, and that the bonds would be issued immediately to fund those beginning activities. And then, of course, we don't have specific projections, but he's mentioning the jobs that will come from construction of a facility that size, staffing it, the tourism opportunities, and additional revenue opportunities. So when we talked in February, Anthony, I think, kind of talked through the constitutional provision that authorizes these kind of bonds. We've tried them twice, I think, to my knowledge. They're very specific provisions in the Constitution, these general obligation limited tax bonds, and they're very broad. So with approval of the voters, you can use these bonds for economic and community development purposes, which include and have been interpreted very broadly to include things like a weather museum, a cultural center, things like that. When we've done this before, it was in 1991. We had an initiative petition come forward asking us to put a measure on the ballot for authorization of general obligation limited tax bonds for the Sam Noble Museum. In that case, it was a total project of $37.5 million. When you look at it, that's really hard to believe how much money, how much construction costs have gone up since then. Gosh. Wow. And the bonds were for $5 million. They were sold 3 years after the voters approved them. And in that ordinance, we stipulated that the authorized bonds would not be issued until the university could demonstrate they had adequate funds for full financing of the facility. And those bonds were paid off in 2004. This constitutional provision will allow you to go up to 30 years, but those obviously paid off quite a bit sooner than that. And then in 2019, the most recent time we've tried to use this, we were trying to do our favorite project, stormwater. So that was not successful, of course, but it was just a recent example where we used that provision. And I provided on the back the possible ballot language, authorizing the $15 million for the broad purpose of economic and community development, but then we narrow it down to include, this specific project. Like all of our other bond ordinances, within the ordinance, we could put more information in there. It would just limit our flexibility. So it's really up to you guys how you want to do that, if you want some restrictions or if you want to be more flexible. Because of this provision in the Constitution, I talked to bond counsel to confirm that it's so broad for economic development purposes, it can be used, it can be used for a privately owned business, so the Weather Museum wouldn't necessarily have to be a nonprofit, it wouldn't have to be owned by the city. That just affects whether it's taxable or non-taxable debt.
Gotcha.
So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Real quick, is this a 50+1 election?
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Schuler.
Okay, so my ears perked up when you said that the bonds would be issued immediately. Is that different than what happened with Sam Noble? Because I feel like what happens if they don't end up having a project that is viable and we've spent $15 million? Like, I like that for the Sam Noble, it was like the bonds are not issued until they can do all the things. And I understand like they want to use it as, seed money, but that is concerning to me. Like that's just a lot. That's a lot of money, of taxpayer money, to say like we're gonna figure it out.
Can you make it contingent?
Yeah, we could put something in the election ordinance itself. We could put together an agreement that would be approved by council at the same time that says, we'll issue. I think Ross's concern is he needs some money to get the plans together, which will help him do the fundraising and all of that. So maybe it's, a
Can we
certain
step it?
smaller amount, right, immediately, and then upon certain deliverables. We could.
Because that's just a
issue
large
more.
chunk of change.
But, yeah, every time you issue those bonds, you're incurring the costs.
Okay, Anthony, do you have something to say?
No, that was correct.
Okay. I was like,
You're coming up here to
you
tell me
came
I was
to
wrong.
the table and I was like,
I thought you were giving me the high side over there.
I'm always looking for what you have to say.
I agree. It's I don't want to say it's a risk, but it's a big leap of faith. And if we could put some provisions in a contract that says, yes, this money's, we're pledging this money contingent on, execution of XXX. Because I mean, coming from the architecture world, I completely understand the reasoning behind needing this money now and basically saying, City of Norman has skin in the game. They're committed.
And that I get,
Yeah,
but also
Totally.
without having any kind of language saying we expect these
Yes.
things, like I feel like it's not tight enough.
Yeah, and if
For
we
me.
put it in
And just
the,
remember, OU, what he demanded, what the Sam Noble Museum demanded, and what OU eventually did, was that they didn't have money in hand, but they had pledges. The state had sold, at least authorized their bonds. The Noble Foundation had given a $10 million donation, so, but it was not like cash in hand yet, it had been pledged. So I think that some language that would sort of tie that down would be useful.
Okay, perfect.
I think
That was my biggest thing.
and putting it in an agreement gives us flexibility if in the future something happens and we need to adjust. If we put it in the taxing ordinance, we're really stuck.
that's a good point. Councilmember Graham.
I was just going back to our notes, but also an agreement about having deliverables. So I guess when we were talking about it, they were thinking somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 million. Also, I have a vague memory, and maybe Mr. Francisco can clear it up, but how did those funds, like, we can't do, how many bonds can we do? Like, if we do this
Yeah,
amount, do
this
we?
particular section of the Constitution limits us to 5 mills. 5 mills for Norman is about $50 million, 55 million.
So we still have
And it's
the
cumulative, so.
potential to do some other bonds if we need them.
Under this section of the Constitution,
Okay,
yes.
so up to 50
Okay.
million. And then also, should we say that there's a location in the language?
We could, but that might be restrictive. I don't think they have a contract yet for the location. I think they have had really positive conversations, but not a contract to purchase. So if we put that in there, we're stuck with that location.
What happens if the location that they've identified doesn't ultimately work out and we are doing this 10 to 15 million, maybe some of that for plans or whatever released early? What happens around that?
I think maybe we can address that with our sort of stair step, sort of deliverables is
If you need
first
the
it's-
money for the land, you get it when you have the contract for
right.
it.
Things like that, yeah, and so that would be the logical next step after design, probably. And so then that's when money could be released for that. But if we put the location that they've proposed, of course, is in University North Park on the east side of 24th. If we put that in the bond ordinance, we're tied to that location, but we could put it in the development agreement that this is where it's intended to be. And then if that changes and they bring that forward to council, then we can adjust that a little bit more easily.
I think with everything being in a flux in that area, I'd like to have some flexibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. Councilmember Schuler. I'm sorry, Councilmember Holman. Good. Sorry.
No, have the same concern. I don't think June is probably practical at all. But I would, so with Sam Noble Museum, if the public funded the startup of it, who owns the museum?
OU.
OU owns it. So what was, so the taxpayers invested in having an amenity, but the public doesn't own it,
Right.
though.
And that's why it's important in this section of the Constitution. Most enabling sections of the Constitution, such as municipal debt, does require the municipality to own the facility.
This one doesn't.
The 60% section does, and certainly the public utility section does, but this section does not.
Okay. Well, I would agree about the deliverables, like maybe a portion could be made available to get whatever off the ground, but the rest has to have something attached to it for sure. I don't know the public would approve just a $15 million blank check or whatever
Sure.
to see if we can get something to project to happen. Yeah, and it seems to me that based off the Sam Noble Museum that they would have pledges lined up before we ask voters to do that. I mean, it
And-
seems
Yeah.
strange to me.
With Sam Noble, we required that before we issued the bonds. There was a 3-year gap.
I think that would be helpful, because I mean, if the public's saying, well, do they have anybody committed to this? And the answer is no, not really, then it's, I don't know.
From what I've heard, and this isn't verified, so take it as a grain of salt, I hear there's state tourism dollars and state,
Yeah.
state funding available if we can show that we're committed, essentially. And that's kind of what this first drop of the bucket is, like,
Yeah.
yes, we're committed, so take the next step with state funding.
Well, it's something I'd like to have in Norman for sure.
Yeah.
And so, it's one of the things I don't necessarily think needs an economic case to be made for it. It's one of those things I think could be a big draw, but also is just, would be something really great to have.
Agreed.
That plays off of something that happens here and that we're known for already. And so, I'd like to find a way to gauge whether a go bond would be something the public would even support or not, or has interest in. So I'm not opposed to it at all. I don't know that, again, that June is
June's pretty aggressive.
doable, but,
I think the desire for the June date from Mr. Forsyth is the release of Twister 2 and some of the
Sure.
synergy. Our other options would be August, which would require a vote by council on second reading at June 11th.
Okay.
And that, yeah, it'd be a big night. November is the only other date beyond August this year.
I think the release of Twister 2 might be a good opportunity to like launch the idea of it, or, or not the idea, we've already been, the
The
idea's
campaign.
out there, but like,
Yeah, the
we want the city to do a bond, here's the kickoff of
Right.
this, either being in the fall or in the late fall, early winter, or early next year, who knows, but
The only thing I'll say on the timeline is that if there are state dollars available and us pushing it jeopardizes those dollars, I mean, I'd be in favor of doing what we needed to do to secure that money,
yeah,
basically.
if there's some guaranteed money
yeah.
out there.
Now, obviously, we don't need to sell the farm on a hope and a prayer, but if it's substantial dollars that we're talking about putting at risk by delaying the vote 3 months, 2 months, it's a conversation that we need to have.
About what other bonds,
Yeah.
what public safety stuff might come back.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
Utility stuff that might have to ask for too. So
Potential shelters, I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that we're
Several.
talking about.
several things, but
Yeah.
possibly.
Me,
Councilmember Schuler.
before you tried to skip over Coleman. So with the election, who is responsible for running the information campaign around this? Like, does the city do that because we're the ones who are issuing the debt, or would the Weather Museum be doing a yes campaign? Or I know we can't do it like a
Right.
yes campaign or a no campaign, but would they be doing their own? Like, whose money are we spending?
We can only do the education campaign, and we probably should do that just because it's an election that council's calling. And then hopefully the Weather Museum would put together a group to run a yes campaign
Okay.
and do advocacy if that's
Yeah.
what they want to do.
Okay.
A couple of other points, or maybe just one, because we've already talked about election dates. You can do a payback for the bonds up to 30 years. So that we kind of need to know how long we want to go. I mean, you don't want to tie up that piece of your millage that you can bond against, probably for all 30 years for this small of an amount, but we can get some projections together to figure out how long, what it would look like at 10 years, 15 years for the taxpayers, to help with that discussion.
And this is something too that, like, with the bridge bond, we went out and did, Tiffany was able to do like a survey of like what those numbers might look like for people, and then they got a say in, because it's on your property tax, right? Yeah. So same kind of deal with the millage. I would like to know what people would feel comfortable with on those numbers, like a 10-year, a 20-year, a 30-year projection, depending on like how much that's going to increase the property taxes over the course of that
Sure.
time frame.
And just remember that the shorter the payout, the higher the tax.
Yes,
Right, yeah.
yeah, over
Which-
that 10-year period.
Makes sense if it frees up that money to reinvest long-term, we don't have to wait, again, the 30 years. I think there's value.
I'm just
Yeah.
interested to see what
Sure. What's the appetite?
Yes.
Yeah. Councilmember Graham.
Going back to the pledges and state or other funding possibly being tied to a timeline, would that also be attached, like you were talking about contingencies, like if this were to get on the ballot, would that also be in there? Like these are is that how you would say who the pledges are and the situation around each of those, or in general?
Yeah, I would say probably put that in a separate agreement that would be voted on at the same time, just so you have some flexibility if you need it. But what'll be in the ordinance, what has to be in the ordinance is the maximum interest rate, which we have in here, what's set in the Constitution, 14%, obviously. Hopefully not anywhere near that.
Yeah.
Or we've really chosen a terrible time. The length of the term, and then just the purpose of those funds. And you can be more general with those. Of course, we want to say Weather Museum, but you could be, by law, even more general than that, and which would free up, if a project fell through, you could use that money for other economic development and community purposes. That's probably not the way we want to go in Norman. Our voters like specificity.
Right, yeah.
But
I agree.
And then also agree with that community education, because I could see like, okay, here's the ballot language, then here's like the attachment, supporting docs, if you will. But I also think that it would be good to hear from people in the community.
yeah, and I can talk to Tiffany about who she had do that and get a quote and start working on
And
that.
what also would happen too if the community is like, oh, we're more comfortable with 5 or 10 million instead of 15, is we might readjust. I don't know. I mean,
So when would you like us to come back with that information?
I mean, obviously, I think the sooner rather than later on this, I mean, yeah, I think I agree that June is probably too aggressive. But
We've had too many questions,
No, I
even
agree.
just
Yeah.
today,
sure, no, it's,
for a Tuesday vote.
I say to my clients a lot, you have to go slow in the beginning to go fast in the end. And so this is definitely one of those where it's like, we should get our ducks in a row and make sure that we're, moving forward with the right plan, not just a plan. I'd be open to an August election. I mean, if that's doable from a education standpoint, getting the design, rendering, getting all the information kind of together.
And that gives us several months
think that's
to
doable.
June
Yeah.
to get everything.
Well, and
Yeah, because you'd be voting on it, second reading June 11th, so that gives us some time to do a survey and
yeah,
Yeah.
kind of get
Okay.
the
and
details
potentially
together.
have people come to that meeting and say they're in favor of it.
Right,
So that's what I want to hear.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the worst thing we could do is spring it on people. Yeah, rush it, get it out there too early, and just
Yeah.
jeopardize it altogether. So
Or to take a question back a second time if
Really?
it's not successful.
yeah, we've seen that recently. Yeah. Too soon. So, Councilor Nash.
Is that estimate on the 5 mil property tax limit being about 50 million?
Yes, sir.
Is that for like a 30-year, like if that were
That's just
extended
what
over
the-
30 years, or is that?
That's where we are now, based on the assessed property value totally in Norman. That's what you can buy with 5 mils, basically. And that really doesn't matter if you're paying it off in 10 or 20 or 30 years.
Okay.
That's just what you can buy. Now, that number goes
I
up
was
with
about
the
to ask
assessed
you.
property value. And it's outstanding debt issued under that. So as you pay down bonds, you open up more,
Capacity.
issuance capacity under that section of the Constitution.
Okay. Yeah, it's the biggest, I guess, concern or worries that just using too much of that pool that we have. It's not very often that we dip from that pool, but once we can get that presentation with kind of breakdown of the numbers and the various scenarios of different repayment periods, be useful.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay. Well, maybe we bring it back to Baca
May.
beginning of May, yeah.
Okay.
And then that gives you time to get additional questions answered and prepare for the May 28th first reading.
That works for me.
Okay.
Councilmember Holman, you had one more.
So our current outstanding bond capacity, or what we're using currently would be our 5-year road maintenance bond.
Yeah, now remember, that's a separate section of the Constitution. There's
So we're
no
not
limit
using,
to how
we're
much-
not using any of the 5 mills for this then right now? Okay, so.
And we've only tried twice in the past to ever use it, so it's not like it's a thing we do.
As far back as we.
Sure, sure.
And it's passed once and failed once.
Right.
Okay.
That gives me a comfort level knowing this isn't something we try to pass, you know, we don't try to fund stuff with this every single year. This is a very limited use. I think it's very appropriate for what we're trying to do,
Make sure it's like tied to, like, the only time we've
right?
really used this, or this is for the Sam
was
Noble
another
Museum,
museum.
which people
Yeah.
really like, as far as I know.
And it's a
Have been
tourism,
successful.
absolutely, yeah. It's
So,
a cultural amenity to Norman.
And that was 30 years ago that was approved, so.
Well, I looked on here, we paid off those bonds in 10 years, it looks like,
Yeah.
so.
We get Gary England to come and endorse it.
I mean, heck yeah.
Helen Hunt.
I don't even know who's the star of Twisted
Yeah, I know,
Two,
there's
so
no Bill
yeah.
Paxton.
I don't know.
Philip Seymour Hoffman, that was the first movie I ever saw him in.
Right.
So you had one.
That's all we had.
Old school logo.
Rest in
Yeah.
peace.
The Turbo logo, I wish they go back to.
Yep, yep, yep.
Okay. I don't know, I'd like for the rest of the council too to, I don't know, maybe they can all come to Baca, but
Yeah.
Yeah,
it'd be good to hear
This
the
is
other
a-
four.
this is a good one to not have the conversation for the first time on the council floor.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and chat with Brenda about getting it on our calendar for May Baca and then the study session right after that. We'll have a full
Perfect.
council discussion.
Perfect. That works for me. Any or objections to that? Okay. Well, I think you have direction, and if there are no more questions, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.